So how many of you would want to work in a startup? Oh, that's a wonderful number. Okay, did you know that almost half of the startups, fail in the first year of beginning operations? Well, this is due to various different reasons, and not having a proper HR strategy in place is one of them. So according to a study conducted by the Society for Human Resource Management in 2015, some of the challenges that HR managers are likely to face in the span of the next 10 years are: almost 59% feel that retaining and rewarding top employees is a major issue, while 52% think that developing the next generation of leaders is a tough challenge. Lastly, 36% feel that creating a work-friendly culture attracts the best and most talented employees. Today, we have the opportunity to interact with our esteemed panel, who will share with us the startup terrain and learnings from their journey as HR leaders in startups, and what should we be ready if we were to join a startup. So I would like to welcome our esteemed panel on stage, please. Mr. T.N. Hari, Head HR Big Basket. He has also authored a book titled Back to Basics in Management. Request you to please come up on stage. Mr. Raj Raghavan, Head HR Amazon. He currently serves on the advisory boards for Forum for Women in Leadership. A big round of applause, please. Mr. Anurag Verma, Director HR at Flipkart.com. And Mr. Mohit Gundecha, Co-founder and CEO, Jombay. Welcome, panel. I would just want to remind you that we have the discussion for 60 minutes, post which we will have a 15 minutes Q&A. Thank you.
So great. Good evening, everyone. Thanks, NHRD, for putting this together. I think it's a very, very interesting and relevant topic. And thanks, Kavita, particularly, for getting us all on stage. And welcome formally Raj, Mohit, and Anurag. Extremely, privileged to be moderating this discussion, and formally welcome to the session. So let me just, start by asking a couple of questions. So the word startup, or the phrase startup, means a lot of things to different people. So let me just start by asking Raj and Anurag, do you consider Amazon and Flipkart as startups? Multi-billion-dollar companies, $200+ billion company, $10+ billion company. In some ways, you must be a startup, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be on this panel at all. You wouldn't have been called. So can you just share your thoughts in terms of what do you think of your companies?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question to start. We are 20 years old. Amazon.com first started in 1996. $100+ billion, 3 large businesses. But if you ask anyone, we still think we are a startup. We want to think of ourselves as a startup. To me, startup is a mindset. It's not so much when you started or when you've just started. It's a mindset. In Amazon, we always say it is still day one. What that basically means is, you want to do the same things that you started off wanting to do, be it one of our biggest leadership principles, as we call them, is customer obsession. So we want to think of the customer and work backwards from the customer all the time. And it's worked well for us. I've kept my job for 5 years now, and we have launched the India marketplace, the retail company. We launched Kindle in India as a business. We launched cloud computing, and my boss back in Seattle tells me, Raj, do you want to stay longer in India? You want to come back? And I'm saying, no, I like it here. So I think it's great to be in a startup time mindset. The big advantage for us is we're not strapped for cash, so that's not a bad thing. You still know you're going to get paid the next month, and That's not bad at all.
So how would you differentiate Amazon from some of the other larger MNCs? So Amazon is also as big as, let's say, GE or IBM. So how would you fundamentally differentiate? Why would you consider yourself a startup, and why wouldn't IBM consider themselves a startup? What are some of the differentiators?
I think that's a great question. I think the difference between a large company and a company that doesn't think of itself large in its heart and mind is bureaucracy, right? I believe, much like my other co-panelists here, and I've known Mohit for a long time. I believe at Amazon we don't do things which are not relevant to the customer, and much the same with Anurag as well, right? It's not as though the other big companies do it. It's just that what happens with bureaucracy is you set yourself up to follow processes, right? You're a very process-oriented company, and at GE we used to take a lot of pride at doing that, and it was for no reason that we took pride in it, because you were working with the government, you were running projects which were multi-year-old, and if you don't follow a certain process, you're not going to be able to go where you want to go. But the flip side of having a very process-oriented culture is that it's so easy for you to be buried under a process and not be a owner. And I think that's a big difference. The difference between Amazon and other large companies is we think like owners and builders. That's a big difference.
Great, interesting. So Anurag, Flipkart was one of the early startups in the recent decade or so, I would say, and pretty much created a lot of interest in this entire startup ecosystem. So how do you think of Flipkart now that you've reached a valuation of $10 billion, become so large in terms of revenues? How do you see yourself?
Yeah, so we still think that we are a startup. The same startup DNA is continuing across, and if you will ask Sachin this question, he would say all those valuations that come across are good to have on the newspapers and for the investors to pour in more money, but please don't get carried away with it. There's still a lot that we want to achieve. The dream is big, and to do that, to achieve it, we have just taken one small step forward. So it's a long journey, and e-commerce revolution has started. It's catching up in big way in India today, and there are products now which you would not have thought of, or also would be sold, right? Today, the news of we also launching across on the automobiles to be sold online is very much there. 7-8 months before, this idea was not very much welcome within Flipkart as well, that we would be going ahead and selling real-time automobiles into the online shopping domain. And still, if you look at the pie of the market, we are just focused only on the major cities and the major capitals. The big challenge is to reach the Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities as the broadband, the internet expands across, the mobile money takes in over, and that's where the big change will come in. So considering that, it's a one step forward and still a startup.
Interesting.
If
So
I
Mohit,
may,
I actually want to ask you this question, your perspective. So I think what both of them are saying in some ways is that the founders are still there. Jeff Bezos is still the CEO, runs Amazon, and Sachin still runs Flipkart. So that's one thing, And they also talked of lack of bureaucracy, continuous innovation. So from your perspective as a young entrepreneur, how do you see these companies? At what stage you think a small company actually ends up becoming a big company, or a big small company ends up becoming a small big company?
So in a lot of ways, I disagree with both of them. I don't think both of these companies are startup perspectives from a risk standpoint.
Right.
From thinking standpoint, completely agree with them. The reasons these guys are succeeding is their mindset, that startup mindset. It's like, so I get often asked, what's entrepreneurship, right? So entrepreneurship is not just about starting company of your own, right? You can also work in an entrepreneurial mindset or in an entrepreneurial setup. So you can still make a difference or go beyond what your job description tells you to do. So in terms of risks or will I survive the next 6 to 12 months? Or will I survive the first 3 years where I can really die? Like 95% startups die in the first 3 years. Whoever survives that 3-year gap, beyond that, for me, they are now building a business. So I would categorize from a real practical standpoint, companies between 0 to 3 years of experience, 3 years of tenure, and their ability to survive beyond 3, then they slightly where their product market fit is established. I don't think any of them have the challenge of product market fit per se.
Right.
The biggest challenge most startups have is their product market fit is a problem. Are they addressing a large enough market? You know, that second challenge. If they are able to get the product market fit right, they're able to address a large enough challenge, and they have been able to hold their early talent together. If they can do that beyond 3 years, I would not call them a startup from a practical standpoint.
So very interesting perspective. I think there are two perspectives to this. I think you put the other one. So let's, for a moment, keep aside the question as to whether Flipkart and Amazon are startups or not. So Mohit, what do you think differentiates startups from mature firms? If you can just be very tangible in terms of 3 or 4 things, because the audience, you know, a large number of them raised their hands that they wanted to work in startups.
Yeah.
So what are the 3 things that differentiate a startup from a more mature firm? And I'm not particularly talking about HR itself, more from a business, more from, you know, other things, and then we'll come to from an HR standpoint.
So change is the name of the game for a startup. You know, so my co-founder often says, fall in love with your company, not your product. Early days of startups, your products are going to change, and you should be okay changing that. Otherwise, you will die. So change is the name of the game. You may not have 3-year plans. Your plans might be 45 to 90-day plans. Even today, many of successful startups I know of have a 45-day execution plan, and then they shift to the next 45. We call it sprints. So change, short-term plans and impact, and you know, willingness to take failure on the chin. Because that's going to come. There are very few companies who hit it right the first place. So ability to take failure on the chin and move on. I think those are the 3 things I would define for a...
Right. Any other thoughts quickly, Raj and Anurag?
I think it's important to think long term. You can't be worried about your next quarter's revenues and next quarter's sales. You need to think long term, and that's what we keep saying in Amazon. You know, there are lots of launches that have failed in Amazon, and we are proud to learn from the failures as much as the successes. The Kindle Fire phone, the verdict is already out, but we don't think it is. There was $1 billion of investment, so that was a big one. The other one, to Mohit's point, I would say is, you know, you want to fail fast. In a startup, and I'm going back. Although he disagreed with me, I'm going back to the mindset issue here. You want to fail fast, and you don't want to be lingering around for a long time and fail much later, and that's a big one. So how do you survive 3 years? You won't survive if you don't realize you're failing.
So I would add in, it's fail fast and iterate faster. Like, if you take too long to iterate and launch a product out, by the time you realize it is working or not, somebody else would have already done, or you would run out of money.
Right. Anurag, you want to add anything?
Yeah, so pretty much what Raj has said on the similar lines, that you just can't in a startup after a while. You know, initial days, yes, the sprints are there, but moment you cross 1 or 2 sprint areas, you need to think a little long term, right? Now, the definition of long term differs from the business that you are and which scale of or life cycle of startup you are. But if you don't think long term, then what will happen is, you know, the mistakes that you do and the learnings that you are happening, you're not able to translate and visualize onto it. So what happens and what differs a startup from mature organization is that there has to be smaller teams, empowered teams, autonomous teams, working independently. Yeah, and if you compare with the software sort of thing, these are the modular teams which are working across. So each team is working on different modules, and then there is a team which interlaces that into one big dream across, right? Which is strategizing and putting across. So there are certain teams which work on very short-term initiatives, right? Quarter by quarter. One is working on a 1-year plan, and one is looking beyond 1 year. And then someone stitches that together. And that's the beauty in the DNA. Yeah.
One word or phrase or sentence that comes to mind which differentiates a startup from a mature firm? I think we've said a lot of things. For clarity for the audience, very sharply, what is that one word, phrase, sentence that comes to mind that really substantially differentiates a startup from a mature company?
I would say a two-pizza team.
Sorry?
Two-pizza team.
Okay.
Okay, what does that mean? You have a small enough team that can be fed on just two pizzas. And you're telling them, you're going to solve it. And go ahead and do what you want. We'll take the risks, but you go solve the problem. You don't see that in big, mature organizations.
Mohit?
Think, own, and run.
Think?
Own and run.
Think, own, and run.
Yeah,
Got
think,
it.
own, and run.
I hope this helps. Sure, great.
Constantly innovate.
Constantly, great. So now let's change gears a little bit and move to people. So what kind of people you think succeed in startups? Because I've been with startups for 15 years, and I found that some people take to startups like fish take to water, and some people are utter failures. They just can't make it in a startup. So based on your experience, what kind of people would you select for working in a startup? What would you look for? What kind of traits, what kind of competencies would you look for? If you can just be very sharp about this, just 3 or 4 things.
So the first and foremost for all mid and senior level people that we look across is a very high entrepreneur mindset. Someone who wants to take risk and ownership, and also very fast on learnability and managing the change. And as we were all talking about, that mistakes will happen across. How fast you come over from the mistake and think over, on another thing immediately. That's the trait that we look into in people.
Entrepreneurship and ability to bounce back.
Ability to bounce back and manage the change, because change is constant.
We'll just come back to this. Mohit?
I think change management totally, like in and out, taking that ambiguity. So dealing with ambiguity, taking full ownership, ability to be okay taking failures.
Mohit, I just want to sharpen this a little bit. Ownership, change management, ambiguity sound very nice. All of us figure that out.
Yeah.
But let's assume that you're talking to somebody who's not worked for a startup. Can you just demystify this? Can you
so
explain it in a way that everyone gets it?
The way I demystify this is when somebody comes, comes for an interview, and even people who worked at larger corporations, they will come and say, so I want to tell about me. Naturally in an interview, people come. I ask only 2 questions. What work do you want to do with us? And why do you want to do that work? Moment you flip that question, people start talking about what kind of work. During that, you have a sense on, has this guy worked in dynamic environments before? Has he worked in too much process-oriented environment? Has he seen ups and downs of the business? And then why he wants to do, you know if this guy is passionate about something. Can be anything. I look for, it could be passionate about your soccer class, it could be passionate about your cricket team, it could be passionate about a Bollywood actor. Can you be passionate about something?
Correct.
Those are the 2 things that gets me some comfort or helps me analyze all of these. Change, ambiguity, failure, ownership, all of them.
Interesting. Raj?
I think much of it has been covered. And being an owner is a big thing, Hari. To think like an owner is a big component of your mindset. And it's not a nice word. To be a owner means that, you're not going to be putting a plastic sheet on top of that right there. You're not going to put a nail there. If it's your own home, you're not going to do that. In addition to what both Anurag and Mohit said, I would say if you're passionate, it's great. But I also want people to be able to disagree and commit. I don't want your passion to be moving so much that you will always be, be like a cat that's got a socks. You know what it does, right? I mean, just tears the socks apart. And I don't want people to just keep their passions on their sleeve and not commit. A lot of times, I would look for people that say, yeah, I don't agree with you, but you know what? I will commit. And that's a very big mindset.
Great. Could we just explore this a little deeper, which is, can you take some examples of someone who's fitted very well in a startup environment, and can you take an example of somebody who was a hiring failure, who just didn't fit? And can you just contrast their behaviors, and that'll help people understand, Okay,
so I have a recent example. So we are a product company. We build products for assessments, developments, all of that. We needed somebody who could do consultative selling with the customers. We got this lady very impressed with her background, the way she spoke, etc. This incident was about a month ago, and we got her on board. Her definition of key account management was plain talk. The requirement of the job was getting hands-on, configuring the accounts for the client, being ability to hands-on deliver the product, and on top of it, then cross-sell, upsell. Right? So the key account management, so you should be okay taking whatever comes to you. You could go up to your boss and say, my time is better utilized for this, hence I need somebody else to work on this. You can't go up and say my job description or, I don't want to do this because I am this at this seniority or whatever. If you can't be hands-on, please don't work for a company which is hands-on.
Insightful. Yeah. Great. Anything you want to add, Anurag?
Yeah, so if you want an example, what worked across in people in a startup, we had an engineer working on coding and designing of our internal ERP that we were building, and he was building a solution for the finance team. So the learnability aspect which I was talking about, he got so deep into understanding of the finance and the business finance aspect that when there was a requirement of looking at hiring a business finance person for our commerce business which is expanding, he came as a unanimous choice. He moved into that role. He not only helped business excel across on those areas, but challenged many of the category leads in terms of why you are looking at things only in these ways. Why not look at profitability on this angle, and why not have these sort of offers going across, and played a vital role in one of those categories where we became a market leader. Coming to the other example of an individual who came across as as Mohit was saying, when we're looking at passion, I will do this, I have a brilliant idea, you give me this, I will do this thing in technology. Brilliant, everyone agreed, gave him across. And all the time what we were talking across was great, brilliant ideas, awesome, which will mesmerize you. Say 7, 8, 9 months, nothing coming out. So what is also important of not being successful is the ability to execute and translate your ideas into actions. Small successes are also important. Yeah.
So one other example, if that helps everybody, because these are real stories and might help some of you. So I have an army of psychologists that work in my team. One of them was a brilliant marketer. I could see ideas, so I blog often and I look for sounding boards who could challenge my ideas. This girl was never fearful of, hey, I am a psychologist pursuing my PhD, I'm spending half of my time on marketing, is this going to spoil my career track? As far as I'm enjoying what I'm doing, I'm excelling at that. Beyond the point, these guys are not insecure about their career. They're willing to do good work is what matters.
Excellent.
That's a good fit example.
Absolutely. Any of you read this book, The Hard Things About Hard Things?
Yeah.
Anyone in the audience has read this book? This is a terrific book in terms of, one single book will tell you everything about startups, what works, what doesn't work, people practices. If anyone is interested, that's just the one book you need to read.
Yeah, highly recommend it.
So the next question, very briefly, if we can just go through this, which is, how do you evaluate people? So we're all fairly clear on what kind of people we need. How do you figure out in a 90-minute interview who is the right person? And let's assume for a moment that you make a mistake. What do you do after that? So just talk a little bit about how do you hire, how do you select precisely, and then let's assume you make a mistake, you figure out after the person comes on board that this person isn't the right fit, what do you do and how do you handle this?
So, I said, my formula still stays the same. You don't ask them about their backgrounds. They know what to talk on their background. So I flipped and asked them that for me, I make it very clear, for me, it is critical to put you in the right role. I have this canvas open, I'm hiring on all ends. You tell me what kind of work you want to do, one. And B, I spend enough time understanding why this, because more often people will say the first answer is according to the JD, blah, 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 blah. I say, go forget the JD. What do you want to do and why you want to do what you want to do? That gets the guy talking, and you have a good sense by experience now of meeting and seeing enough people. You generally have a good sense. On top of it, we have some tools to aid in terms of giving us a better insight on where to grill the person beyond that. However, there is still a chance of failure. The trick in managing failures is don't take too long. It's not good for you and not good for the person if you keep dragging that person just because you've brought him on board now. You try to see if there is some other option for that person where they can excel. If not, it's a good idea to part ways early. And that early is not 2 years.
Got it, absolutely. So Raj, would you just quickly want to talk about, how would you hire a peer at senior level, a peer at Amazon, a CXO at Amazon? How would you go about hiring this person, and what happens if you figure out that you made a mistake? How do you deal with it?
Yeah, no, I do that for a living, including making mistakes. I think it has to be a good discussion. It cannot be an interview of sorts. It has to be a good discussion, a good camaraderie in terms of, being able to find out what's in the person's mind as we talk. At Amazon, we use our leadership principles as a competency. So there are several of them. It's on the Amazon.com website. So we use those competencies when we interview people. And we want to use what's the situation, behavior, impact, criteria. So we want people to give us specific examples of what's happened. There are several of us that talk to senior candidates. For example, my interview 5 years ago, I met about 12 people, about 5 of them here and about 7, 8 of them back in Seattle. And sometimes I think if I were to interview for my own job today, I may not get hired. Because your bar is going up all the time, and you're expecting, I've never done this job before. The job that I do currently, I've never done that. I had never done that 5 years ago. So if somebody were to look for me for having done this job, I would probably not even get shortlisted. So the point then is, what do you then look for? So we've had several people from very established, mature organizations come in and succeed. A few of them have not. And several of us meet, so it's, and we then kind of debrief. So one of the things that we do is, if 8 of us meet, it's not as though 8 of us, say a one line saying, yeah, I want to hire, I don't want to hire. We have very detailed notes on every candidate that we meet. And we use our recruiting portal to post those notes. So for example, I'll be debarred from being an interviewer if I don't, put those notes up on my recruiting portal. And then we debrief, and 8 of us meet, and we challenge each other. If all of us are inclined to hire the person, we challenge what are those things that we want the hiring manager to know as areas of improvement that you want that person to be aware of as we bring on the person. If several of us are not inclined, we challenge, was there a bias? Was it very late in the evening, like all of them are sitting, we are the last panel. So, much like, is there, or people getting mentally tired? It's very difficult when people are mentally tired. And, when you're doing back-to-back interviews, and I tell my senior candidates when they come to meet us, I want you to be mentally prepared, to be intensely challenged each minute. And it's going to be 5 one-hour-long meetings. And it's going to be 2 days. And it's going to be 10 people you're going to meet. At the end of the 9th person, you're going to say, do I really need this job? And to me, as much as the company is interviewing a candidate, the candidate is interviewing the company too. I mean, the candidate is saying, is this a place I want to work? Are these the colleagues I want to work? Today, people are not leaving companies or managers anymore, right? People are leaving colleagues and co-workers. So that's what we do.
Right. So Anurag and Raj specifically, and Mohit, if you wish, please chip in. Can you take a real-life example, without taking names, of a very senior level person that you hired from a large company because you wanted to scale, and you found that this person didn't work out? If you can just take us through the entire process, hiring, what happened, how did it pan out, and what happened eventually, with a real-life example.
Sure. So,
you're being recorded.
no, that's what I was trying to be as generic as possible, but most of the things is on the media, so people might pick up whom I'm talking about, but I will be trying to be more generic. So, hiring is, as Raj explained across, is pretty much a similar process in Flipkart as well. it's not one person's responsibility. And similar process goes in, particularly when we are hiring CXOs, and this is some time back, not recent, that we were looking for someone to scale one of our categories which was not there existing, and we wanted to scale up and wanted someone from outside to come in, because most of the time, when we are looking for senior level leadership hiring, the first question that we ask is this skill not available, or this experience and expertise not available inside? Then only we need to go outside, or if there is someone who can scale up and take it, why not? Because you know the individual, right? So you're minimizing the risk of hiring a wrong leader into the category. And this was clearly a case where we didn't have. So the panel was elaborate. There were good 15 people meeting this gentleman, and doing all sort of discussions around it. Post that, we had given him certain scenarios and outlooks and caselets to be presented across, which he came, presented before all these 12-15 people. Good amount of questioning happening across. Then we also took him to meet his directs who would be working across with him and his peers. He getting a view of those people, and they giving a view of this individual as well. Looked to be a good foolproof process. The individual was hired. He came across with great set of ideas which he was trying to triangulate during the discussion point. But what went missed across from this individual is that the DNA that is there of the urge to do things very faster and go deeper in terms of the ownership aspect, and what we missed during this entire interviewing process.
So how long did it take for you to figure that out?
It took us around 9 months.
9 months?
Yes.
Wow.
Because this was one area where we didn't have an expertise. So we were always giving a second chance to an individual that maybe, this went wrong.
How many
and
chances would you give, Mohit?
Yeah.
See, the entrepreneur, many entrepreneurs are irrationally optimistic, right? You think, okay, maybe not this, he might work on something else, not something, you might, this guy. So, often there is a fear that, okay, if he's not there, what could happen? So that might, it's an entrepreneur pitfall. You might extend the runway for no reason, and at the end, the output will still be the same.
How much time would you give?
So 3 months at max, and then life moves on.
So Raj, if you can just talk a little bit about, the hiring process for a very senior person from a large company. You were scaling, you needed to hire somebody from a large company. How did the candidates approach? I think you may be the wrong person to ask. Let's say two of you. I don't know if you will be. So if you hire somebody from a large company, you would not be the right person because you're already a very large company. So how did they come and talk to you? Did they come and talk to you, as if patronizing tone, oh, Jombay, I know everything. Who are you to ask me? How did they come across?
So it was a very pleasant experience. So somebody who's worked about 15 years odd between consulting, corporate HR, I was looking for somebody to lead our assessment center practice, the virtual assessment center. A very interesting lady, MBBS, like very few, so was a practicing doctor, went to MBA HR, worked across the board. If you look at the resume, you will say that this resume may not fit a startup. Largely process-driven companies. And that's another pitfall. There's no formula number 44 for hiring.
Correct.
If the person has worked in an unstructured environment, even in a large company, you can't take that against them. They are definitely suitable. This lady has come and transferred. So she came in, was very receptive. She questioned me on the business. But the goal was not to pull the business down, but intellectually ask me of how you're looking to scale this up. How from 200 customers would you get to 1,000 customers in the next 2 years? So when you have somebody who's challenging you from the perspective of growing the business, you get that vibe already that this lady is not trying to pull your idea down, but rather to help. So that already gives a comfort. There are people who will first and come and ask, what's the funding in the bank, and what are the perks I have? Those are not the best conversations to be had upfront. Sure, that's an important part of the conversation. But first, let's have the chemistry fit, and then we will look at the other pieces.
Great.
And it's also it answers the question that you had asked before. Some of these guys, this lady, turnaround times, like she is as agile as I've seen any startup employee work. So that's why despite being working in a large company environment across several years, you will end up finding people who will come and work in a startup mindset.
So what's the failure rate that you've seen in your hiring?
15, 20%.
15, 20%. So you
Yeah.
get 80% of them
Yeah,
fairly correct.
Yeah. But as the organization grows beyond 500,000 odd people, this ratio will go up. You will because you don't get to interview everybody, the last guy, and that's
Excellent.
bound to.
So if you just pick one or two red flags in any meeting with a candidate, what would those one or two red flags be?
I think cultural assimilation is a big part. To be able to assimilate with a startup culture or a different company structure is a big part. For me, not red flags. Things that will concern me is, Amazon is we are a very humble company. We are not buoyant. We don't go and thump our desks and scream at each other. And we get worried if people were to come and ask us, will I get a secretary to start with? Will there be a butler outside my office? Can I get coffee served? So what size of a car can I drive? When I go to Seattle, which hotel will you put me up at? Why don't you send me by first class?
Terrific. These are all great red flags. Immediately you can pick them up.
One of my bosses, when I used to run MiG-33's India operation, so he used to be at Yahoo, media company. And when you're a media company, your gross margins are higher. And then he came to run a startup, MiG-33, which was WhatsApp in the virtual world. So at Yahoo, he was used to flying business. At first, often, right? He used to run mobile business globally. But he could beautifully adapt himself into this culture of where we all flew coach. And sure, he would use his miles. He had so many miles amassed over the years that he used to still get upgrades. But regardless, he fit himself in this environment. If you get used to that luxury and can't flip, then it's going to be
Perfect. I think very sharp. These are absolute red flags. Anurag, you want to add anything?
Pretty much the same, because the typical red flag to us is teaming and collaboration, which is very important. And someone who tends to believe in silos and not teaming and collaborating, and other than the other values which Raj and Mohit talked about, is pretty much a red flag. Yeah.
Just changing gears a little bit, what are two things that startups care about that mature firms may not care much about, and vice versa? Care a lot about startups which mature firms may not care much about.
I think the big one is very much around customer centricity. Because at each level, what we are looking at is a very high degree of customer orientation, even if you are on a non-customer facing roles in the organization. And second thing is all about taking the ownership and a very high mindset of changing learnability and adaptability.
Great.
I would say speed and bias for action. That's something I think young companies will care for a lot more.
Yeah.
The other one is, shoot first and aim later is another one, which is okay, you go shoot, as long as you don't kill Amit sitting there, And the third one is, you trust first and then audit later. In a
Very
big
sharp,
company,
extremely
it's
sharp.
trust.
All the three are spot on. So speed, agility, and get things done, trust and absolute audit later. Mohit, you just want to add anything? I think you've said it pretty much.
I think, yeah.
Great. So coming to, I think the lady who introduced us said that startups often fail, 90% of startups fail in the first, whatever, X period of time. So if you have had to identify some reasons for failure, and I'm not talking of external reasons here, where there's a poor product customer fit, or for example, suddenly the ecosystem for startups, the funding has dried up. I'm not talking of those reasons, just internal reasons for failure. What would be some of the biggest reasons why startups don't make that leap?
See, more often than not, so I will flip the question and answer what you're saying.
Yeah.
More often than not, startups who tweak and pivot fast succeed because they're constantly they're very receptive to the customer, see where they can smell money. What happens is that is possible only if your people buy-in is there. If your people drive that change versus you only as a founder drive that change. So startups fail because, so we have pivoted the business models twice, and there are a bunch of companies I know who have pivoted and then actually found the product market fit. So they are not able to get their people drive that change, or the people buy-in of why we are changing is not there. Then you have all kinds of problems. Unhappy employees then is a recipe for failure, because they don't trust you on why and where we are heading towards. I came on board with a certain business plan. In 45 days, what has happened that what was A has all of a sudden become B, and why are we doing that? If it's just a top-down approach there with people, then it's going to be a disaster.
Raj, you
I'll
want to
probably add that, if you're not vocally self-critical, your chances of failure are much higher. You can't think that, your sweat alone smells of perfume, right? Everybody's sweat smells as bad as it does. So that is one big piece. The second big piece is, if you're going to have people that keep telling yes to you all the time, you'll fail.
Got it. Anurag, you want to add anything?
The fast adaptability, what Mohit talked about, to the change is very important. And the second big thing is that, in the startups, if the leader is, or the founder is having his own way of looking at things, that doesn't help. So it has to be a very collaborative environment where empowerment to the teams is there, and mistakes are good.
So, to make it sharp, I know you like sharp answer. If you're not a good listener and your people are not good listeners, this company is bound for failure. But then you will not hear what the customer is saying. You can't, because there are signals around. It's not that, the ecosystem gives you signals. Your people will give you signals. There's something is wrong here. I don't get that feel. So if you ignore that and you're drinking your own Kool-Aid, then that's going to be...
Maybe another one is, if you're concerned too much about your competition and not worried about your customer, you'll fail.
Absolutely. Great. So maybe we'll just change gears once again a little bit and go to the topic of culture. So this is something where I would request you all to keep your views very sharp, because the topic is a little vague and fuzzy. A lot of people think it doesn't mean anything and it is not substantial. So does culture make a difference? And what is culture actually? Can you just talk a little bit, what is culture? Demystify that concept, talk in specific bullets, and can you define culture for your organization in 3 bullets? So what is culture, and is it important? Is it more important in a startup than a bigger firm?
You're more difficult than my headmaster in Ramakrishna Mission School. I don't know of bullets, but I think culture is a result of lots of behavior and the way you react to a certain situation. In Amazon, the culture is, you start with the customer and work backwards. And it's a very significant culture. What this means is, everybody has good intentions. Nobody has bad intentions. If you want to come and solve a problem, but good intentions alone are not good enough. In Amazon, we say you can have good intentions, but that's not good enough. So what is good enough? What is good enough is you need to have mechanisms to be able to follow through some of these good intentions. And that is what for us is culture. For example, several of us have probably heard this before. In the early days of Amazon, when Jeff ran meetings, there was always an empty chair. And the chair represented a customer. So he said, anything that we discuss today, does it make a difference to the person sitting in this chair? If it doesn't make a difference to the person, let's not talk about it. And that's culture to me.
Great. Mohit, I think in your context, I'd love to know, in a young startup culture equals founders, right? Yeah. And I think as a startup continues to grow and founders continue to stay with the company, I think founders contribute a large extent to what culture is. Yeah. And culture in a startup is not, fiction. It is real, right? And cultures from one company can be very different from a culture in a different company. For the audience, could you just demystify this very specifically? Take company A, culture this, company B, culture this, very different in terms of beliefs, in terms of what they do.
So I would quickly define culture. I've blogged about it. So if it is intangible, it is not culture. Culture, I believe, is a canvas which needs to be visible and on the walls of your company. If you can define culture to that extent, which is actionable, that's culture. So, so when we shifted from a small office to a wider office, a larger office, we said we will not let the founders define culture. We will let people who have been working with us for the last 5 years, they have seen it through. Let them define culture. And we told them, come back with one quote, each of you, that you believe stands for who we are and what we are trying to achieve. 3 things came consistently and they became culture at Jombay. One was, the only thing between you and your aspirations is this bullshit story that you keep telling yourself as why you can't achieve it. That is number 1. Number 2 was, make mistakes but fail fast. And number 3, go big or go home.
Right.
These 3, from a people, product, and business aspiration standpoints, define culture at the company. Apart from our values on think, own, and run. These are not moral science values which stay on your walls, but nobody, they don't exist and nobody practices. So organizations where culture is tangibly defined and there is enough emphasis on how that culture leads to customer happiness, your business growth, are the organizations where it really matters and exists.
So I just want to ask you a practical question. So this is where I've really grappled with culture. I clearly understand that culture makes a lot of difference. Culture is very tangible and it differs from firm to firm. And in startups, it is actually very important. So when you get a bunch of people together and you get them from different backgrounds, you as a founder come with a certain culture, right? You have certain beliefs and that defines what's important for you and for your company that you've set up. But when you assemble a bunch of people who work very closely with you, how do you ensure that they're aligned with you? Because deeply, if they don't believe in what you do, then the culture just gets fritters away, right?
It's not a one-time thing. You can do a lot of monologue, inspire people, tell them this is what we are here for, this is the culture, and move on. It doesn't work. Every Monday in the evening, 7 to 10:30, I spend with 8 of my direct reports for a dinner. All we discuss is people and culture. The business review, the weekly review happens from 6 to 7, and 7 to 10 is all we speak about is people and culture. Because you got to keep doing it again and again, and the culture will evolve. You can't say, this is what I stand with. If somebody is making intellectually valid point and it makes sense as an organization, you should be willing to do that. So sharper answer is, you have to keep doing it again and again. It's not a one-time thing.
Absolutely. Great. Anurag, you just want to add something to this?
Yeah, similar, more or less, culture as in a startup or in any organization is very tangible, and that's what is a common belief is as well. But defining culture is always the most difficult ask for any organization to do. And what we have seen in Flipkart and also have seen in other organizations is it's an evolution, and it goes from stages of an organization that it moves across. But there are certain guiding principles that what you would like to answer when you are in dilemma and taking an important decision. With what will be, the binding force that will help me take this decision, whether I'm correct or not. And to me, what those values commonly exhibited by most of the people in the organization is what derives your culture. So in the current scheme of things in Flipkart, what we have tried to put across is very crisp 3-4 pointers. One is customer first. Second is thinking big. Third is about bottoms-up innovation. And fourth is outstanding people. So not in that order of that, but first and foremost is this problem that we are solving is keeping customer first. And then looking at people constantly exhibiting those, it's good to have those motherhood statements written across on posters and billboards, but if people are not exhibiting it, those values are not analyzed between the people, it doesn't translate. And as we are growing, the chances of missing the ball is very high. So what we have done is we have made certain leaders who are the cultural champions across. They go and assimilate the new leaders that are coming in. Different portals, platform, we put across those stories which resonate with each of these values and what has taken Flipkart out to this level.
Excellent. Yeah.
Example, very interesting example. So Taj Hotels is one of our customers, and one of their values is passion.
Yeah.
Now, I never understood what passion meant for them till the time the director HR told me an example. He said there was this customer who walked into one of the Taj luxury hotels. He carried a Ganesha idol with him. He kept it on the desk and went off for the business meetings. In the evening, he comes back and he saw petals of roses, rose petals put around the idol. Now, the guest was so thrilled and this was done by the housekeeping staff. Now, the guest was so thrilled to see that Taj made it a practice across all luxury hotels. Now, what they do to push this culture is they made this a case study. This was passion, was pushed out to a whole range of employees. That's how you imbibe culture via certain case studies. How do you amplify such examples and then inspire others to imbibe?
Yeah, absolutely. I think at Big Basket also what we've done is things which really matter. We just defined that as our culture. A couple of things that you mentioned, speed and a sense of urgency in everything that you do. We've defined that as an element of our culture. It is important for everyone. Maniacal focus on customers, for example, is a passion. And ownership, even if everything is not in your control, is an element of culture. So things which are really important, we define that. But I think what we've struggled with constantly is how do you ensure that a large number of people are aligned to this, constantly aligned to this? I think that is what...
There's always a business problem to be solved. And there's always, every manager has a burning business problem to solve. In that aspect, cultural aspects take a back seat. The trick is to keep reminding yourself that not only when somebody comes up and puts a pink slip and then you have to then get back and say, what did we do wrong?
I think if you can get the culture piece right, a lot of other things get done automatically. For example, you don't need a job description. You don't need a standard operating procedure. When the standard operating procedure isn't clear, culture helps you figure out what is the right thing to do, for example. Great. So maybe I just wanted to explore one more thought with you. Two large companies, one fairly small company. Would any of you have any experience in terms of going from a small company to a large company? So Anurag, you've been with Flipkart sufficiently long. Yeah. So how did you see the transition process? How did Flipkart grow? What changed? And how, as you know, it's like a living organism, right? An organization. So how did this living organism change?
Well, extremely engrossing and immersing experiences, and still continuing with the same. And I've seen, business growing from leaps and bounces, almost 3x, 4x on a quarter-to-quarter basis, and the organization is scaling very faster, right? So what happens is when you are working in such high-paced, high-growth organization, the passion, the adrenal is very high. The self-motivation is also very high, but there is a, the flip side of it that you burn out very fast, right? And to keep up with that pace, it's just that you're running on a treadmill which has gone berserk. And if you don't run with that space, you will fall down. And that's the biggest challenge that an HR guy faces across in such a startup organization, how to maintain that balance of that individual keeping on running on the treadmill, because you can't stop the treadmill, right? That's running faster.
How do you move from the treadmill and bunk beds in office culture to a 9-to-6 culture? Did you make the transition at all? No,
we were not forcing the transition at all. What we did is, make people realize that, it's not one person or one single team that will make a difference, and it is important to create more of you, right? What the tendency generally happens of people is, and usually also in the startups, and there's a typical HR resistance as well, not to hire more, right? We don't have a visibility of business. What will happen when more people come in? Do we have business? Would we have to lay off and other things? What we did in Flipkart is that create more people, and the way that you will hire more of your people and how fast you can get away with your job, and you take other responsibilities, and that helped. That there were different people who were working across, and there was never a rule of timing in the office, right? So we never said across it's a flexi timing or a core timing. Wherever you want to come to work across, so there were different people, some early morning comers, some during the afternoon, and that's how it helped.
Excellent.
Yeah.
One question for all of you, which is, you are all in different stages of your organization. Amazon, very large, you need to make that leap into the next phase, and Flipkart, you need to make that. So what is one thing that you are currently wary of? What can make you trip in that leap to the next phase? So what are you wary about? What are you watching out for? What is that one mistake you wouldn't want to commit?
The biggest one is again losing the startup mindset and startup culture. The moment you become complacent, the moment you think that you have achieved, you have gained a market leader position, you're gone. So the one thing that we will not like to give up is the startup DNA, wherein you're always sprinting as well as looking at the long-term vision as well, keeping that alive.
Mohit?
Unhappy employee and an unhappy customer.
So that's what you're
that
watching
can put
out
a spanner to everything you do.
So maniacal focus on customers and those who serve customers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Raj? Got it. So I think one last topic, which is really for Mohit, which is you are really a startup guy at this point of time. Everyone else is migrated to working for large companies, startups which have grown to become large companies. So you worked with startups as well. You're not just a startup, but you worked with multiple startups. Can you just take us through the startup ecosystem? What are you seeing? What are some of the challenges that entrepreneurs are facing? And leave it to you. Just take us through the whole ecosystem and what is.
So there are broad 2 or 3 focus areas from an HR standpoint that most startups have. One is their talent branding. So let me take a step back. In startups, most startups, HR is really a CEO problem. May not be very intuitive,
Absolutely.
but an unhappy employee keeps me up. Right? Because I know what a bad apple can do up to a particular team, or an unhappy employee can do to something. So a wrong or a bad employee. So we get 40 or 50% of our business from startups is initiated by the business guys and not the HR guys in that company. So having said that, tactically, talent branding and attracting the right talent. So we have seen the decision making in putting psychometric tools or different recruitment processes to make sure that they attract right from the way they write their job descriptions to the way they get people on board. So faster decision making on talent acquisition side. On the managerial development side, many of them are at young levels. How do mentors, coaches can come and supplement that and take the teams to the next level? Many of these guys are homegrown, friends, family who had worked with them, studied with them, and they've come on board. So how do you get their mindset? Aspiration, passion is there, basic hygiene is there, but as the startup becomes a real business, things need to change, and to make that shift, a lot of founders are investing time and effort in getting that change. So short story, it's a dear CEO problem. Be it employer branding really matters, and they go all out to make sure. And these are all guerrilla techniques to do things to come out and be visible in the market. And see, how do I get my co-founders to be business leaders who can take on the company to the next level?
There are a lot of young entrepreneurs like you, right? In fact, you guys have become celebrities, and it's because of people like you that a large number of people want to work for startups. So how are you seeing the entire young entrepreneur group? How are they learning things, and how are they scaling stuff, and how is the whole thing happening?
So entrepreneurship was risky 2 years ago, right? Maybe 3 years ago. It has become sexy, and that has increased the problem. Because number of applicants or applications that come to you, you have to, initially it was a self-selection. Right? People who used to come or even apply, you knew, okay, he's taken that effort, found out. So even today, most of our applicants are people who search for Pune startups, something they'll somehow find Jombay, then apply. Initially, those were the guys you knew had done the effort, done the homework. Screening them was much easier. Now, wanting to do startup, it's entrepreneurship in this country today is overly romanticized, right? So it's sexy from the outside, but when you actually get into this, you really need to be made for this or want to do this so that you can see it through. At whatever stage, it is tricky. So having said that, there are people that you consistently find and you find them inspiring. You want to go to work because they work there. And that's the thrill. Though the significant change that has happened is no longer I need to go and convince somebody's father or father-in-law that, hey, we have the money in the bank, we are good people, we will do good, interesting things. The first employee that I did for Jombay, I actually had, because we didn't have an office. I had to convince his father, look at my credentials, we will see it through. Don't worry, your son is in safe hands. That does, because even in rural areas or uptown places, in local Marathi or whichever language newspapers, entrepreneurship is widely covered. No longer is the problem that if you don't get a job at Infosys, you are not going to get married. That problem doesn't exist anymore. So that has brought in entrepreneurs who want to do this, but some of them are learning on the go and they've really scaled, and there are so many of the examples where people learn on the job. Some others make some more mistakes, but at the end they learn. For all of them, one thing is in common: people who succeed, there is never the end of the world. There are enough occasions where you will feel, shit, this is done, and I think we're going to go out of business. Next day morning, you still get up and say, okay, I'm going to take this on and still...
Great. We just have 5 minutes. So most startup HR heads or CEOs sell startups a lot, great places to work. Could you just tell us one negative thing about working for a startup? Would you like to de-sell startups to this group and tell them why not to work for a startup?
I can actually go. It can be a very intense place. The intensity is high, and your urge to be right most of the time is very high. You don't have to be right all the time, but you have to be right most of the time. The intensity, you have to be made out for it. Yeah. And if you're not, you shouldn't try it.
Great. Mohit, one sentence, maybe 2 sentences.
Yeah, humble. It's a very humbling experience. You are taking on big guys. There will be failure that comes your way. If you can't take failures, don't bother working in those environments.
It's not at all sexy. So one word would be that. If you're looking for the glamour and other aspects, please don't consider startups. It's really is draining. It's intense. And you have to constantly raise your bar.
But having said that, it's...
Don't sell again.
Yeah, it's a worthwhile experience. And people who worked with me have gone on even to start their own companies, and there are board members who have done startups 4 times, and they still love doing it. If you like winning, this is the place to come and work.
Sure, I can't agree more. Startups are a great place to work, and I'll never work for any other place. Great, thanks all of you. It's been a great session, and thanks the audience. So what's the process now? It's just a question answer, I'm assuming, right? Yeah, sure. Would you just like to say your name as well when you ask a question? And ideally, just identify the panelist who you would want.
Okay, so I have one question. My name is Vaibhav. I'm from Infosys. So while we're talking about startups, and as Raj said, it takes time. We have to think long term, right? So what challenges as HR you think that, because the company is focused and also employees needs to be focused. So while we are while we are changing continuously, quarter on quarter, maybe year on year, what kind of challenges you face with workforce?
No, I didn't get the question.
Okay. No, so I'm saying, while you said that the focus should be long term.
Yeah.
Correct? So obviously, while we talk about innovation, changes, enhancement on continuous basis, so obviously our employee workforce, that also needs to be changed. right? So you as an HR director, what do you think are those challenges to deal with those workforce while the changes are on? Because the company is on stake and also employees, right? So what kind of HR challenges you face?
I'm not sure I still got the question, but HR challenges I can take. There are several of them. There are several of them, including getting people to understand your intent and to understand that you can self-select and opt out of doing things. Challenges continue. Talent acquisition is a big challenge. Hari referred to us as a big company, but that doesn't make it easy to get people to come and work for you. That continues to be a big challenge. Talent management is a big challenge. How do we scale? Scaling is a big challenge. In fact, when you grow from a smaller company to a larger one, how do you scale up? And how do you continue to run on all cylinders, even as you grow is a big challenge. I'm not sure I quite got your question, but I hope I kind of answered, yeah.
Hi, my name is Neha, and I'm myself working for a startup right now. And I have worked for another 2 startups before this startup that I'm working. So my question to you is, I totally agree how talent acquisition could be important to a startup, how getting the right fit is important to a startup. But in terms of HR processes, what do you think is the right time for a startup to think about good HR processes to bring into the company? I mean to say how important it is to just initially worry about the business strategies and not worry about the HR strategies, and when it is the right time to start looking on the HR strategies, as well as when we are hiring the right fit. How long you think should we endorse the thing that startups say that we are not process-oriented company right now, we are not in good process. So how long a startup should remain a startup? Not from the point of view that, the hunger should not be there. Yes, we are startup even after 10 years, the hunger should be there. We should keep growing and feel that we are still young and start. But how long should we endorse this particular thing of not being process-oriented company?
Let me just take a shot at this. So I think the way I would look at this is that, an organization from being a startup to a mature firm goes through multiple stages of evolution. I think this is fairly well-researched subject. And I think there is a point of time when, at each point of time, there is a driver of growth and there is a potential point of failure. So at each point of failure, if an organization overcomes that point of failure, it gets to the next stage of growth. I think the key point really is at what point of time does a firm, a startup, grow from being a big, small firm to a small, big firm. That is really when it needs to begin to put strong processes in place. A large organization overemphasizes processes. A smaller organization undervalues, underplays process completely. But when this transition happens, I think organization needs to understand that we need to emphasize a process. We need to emphasize audit, especially when it comes to compliance, when it comes to regulatory issues. You can't go weak on that. So I think there is a very clear phase when an organization goes from being a big small to a small big company. And at Big Basket,
in
clearly, I think
terms
we are in
of
that
number
phase.
of employees, it does go to big number very easily, very fast, because the funding has to come. There is a 3x, 4x kind of a increment that you're expecting, and you hire really fast to grow fast. So I think that comes really quickly in startups, but still the process, I think, are missing in most of the startups.
I was going to say that a lot of people putting their hands up. So I think we should limit it probably to one, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Hello, this is Ajit Kamatia. Just one question, I heard a lot of information, that was good. But let's ask a basic question. What should a well-trained, well-qualified HR professional that many of us here are, should unlearn when he or she joins a startup?
That's a great question. Lots of things need to be unlearned. I think firstly, you need to set aside the thought that I'm well qualified and I'm well trained. I think that itself is an unlearning opportunity. In fact, today you're saying a lot of people who are not career HR people coming and taking HR jobs. So for them, they were neither qualified nor trained. And those are the ones that are getting big bucks and getting hired. I think in terms of recruiting, automation is key to have a great platform to hire, and if you're going to hire in, and so you need to think of how HR technology can come in handy when you're doing your job, and that's a big thing to me. Maybe I'll let others take a shot.
Hello. Thanks a lot, panel. That was an extremely engaging, data-packed, refreshing discussion. And I'm sure everybody here would now like to either join a startup or have one of their own.